I mean, that song just feels like Bear Halvorson. I mean, it just, you look like you made that song.
Yeah.
That wasn't you, was it?
No.
Everybody, welcome to another episode of 49 Volts. I'm your host, Josh, and the awesome list of guests continues. We have my good friend, Bear Halvorson from the Security Today podcast, headbanging right along with me. How we doing, Bear?
I'm good, man. I'm so glad to be here. I thank you for your patience. I know you were asking me a couple months ago, and I'm like, yeah, let me get it figured out. But I've been itching to get on the 49 volts. So,
well, you're here, man, and I'm going to start us. I'm going to start us off with controversial questions because you're the guy for that, man.
I am. Bring them all.
All right. So I love to participate in these installation fail posts. I love to make funny. I love to make jokes. And I guess I'm curious your thoughts, if maybe you see this a little differently. People like me, I think that we're contributing to, holding people accountable and trying to help promote better standards out there and have a little fun while we're doing it. Do you see it that way? Or do you think that maybe we're hurting some feelings out there, being a little unfair, maybe not solving the problem, but maybe just making it worse? What do you think?
Did you see my post before you wrote this question on LinkedIn
today?
No, it was a couple days ago.
Maybe I didn't.
Oh, okay. You sent me this question like right after I'd posted this, and I was like, I wonder if he saw that. But that's funny.
No.
Wow. The universe is just lining up. So I posted on LinkedIn just a couple days ago, this last week, that I said something like, just make sure that the only contribution you're giving to the industry via LinkedIn isn't just posting other people's subpar work. And I had a paragraph that kind of detailed that.
Now, I would like to mention that I post my own subpar work because this podcast goes out once or twice a week, but go ahead.
No. It's not subpar, man. Let me tell you. That's another podcaster. It's not subpar. No, so I think that, first, I'm Bear from the Security Today podcast. I forgot to say that. And I've been in the industry like 12 years probably, starting out in most of my career as a technician. So this is kind of a point that hits close to home.
Right.
And the Security Today podcast base listener set, maybe it isn't this, it's more even now with maybe white collar or more corporate security professionals, but it started out really heavy on the technician side. And
right.
I do notice that on LinkedIn, it's very popular and it gets a lot of comments and it gets a lot of likes and it drives a lot of media and, interactions to post, failed work that was not done excellently. Most of the time, probably not done by like an actual technician. But if it was, that technician usually isn't trained, and
right.
And it kind of falls apart over time. And then someone takes a picture and it gets a bunch of people LinkedIn comments. There's stuff that gets posted like, who is it? I know that like Benji posts some failed stuff with doors.
Right.
I know that there's a couple other guys that I follow that post stuff, and I comment on sometimes that I give a quippy, answer trying to get people to laugh or something like that. But I noticed that sometimes it's easy to become your main contribution in social circles to post failed work.
Right.
And I think I have a couple of feelings about it. Obviously, it's not bad to share it from a professional to a professional every now and then. You post it on there. You're like, guys, look at this. It's crazy. I ran into this today, But for the most part, I feel like there's a huge gap in education in the security industry. We've talked before about that on other podcasts. And, I feel as if the education is lacking enough that a lot of times when people are posting this work, it's for the laugh And it's almost at that guy's expense because he wasn't trained. He wasn't shown what to do. He probably had some old codger be like, well, just put it up there, and then not check his work. And they're on to the next one. They're time crunched, the whole nine, right?
Yeah.
And it sucks because that guy sucks. That work sucks. And that sucky work is getting recycled to laugh at the suckiness, but it's like not bettering the industry by any means. It's just for our entertainment. And
Yeah.
I would actually, okay, so I have a Instagram handle that I have not contributed to in a while, maybe like a couple years, but I ran it for maybe a couple years called @CleanCanMafia. And I would find posts of just immaculate cans from electricians, from low voltage, security, whatever it be. And I would
Right.
repost them and tag people in it and stuff like that. Trying to show that like there's actually excellent work out there too.
Yeah.
But I feel like what I would like to see, and I don't have the time to do this, or I would, but take shitty installs that you get posted and maybe back it by some video that you can kind of. My headphones just told me that they're low battery, so that's awesome. But no, but repost it with some video and talk about like, oh, this is maybe what would have fixed that. These are the tools that would have fixed that. Knowing this knowledge set would have fixed that. Never at the guy's expense who put it in. But I would actually like to see that. I think it would go far. I have a mixed view. That's a very long answer to say, well, sometimes it makes me laugh and sometimes it makes me throw the middle finger. So like,
I think that's fair. And so you were talking about your Clean Can Mafia, which was my nickname in high school. I used to, do a little part-time janitorial work and no, it's like that makes me think of like Blake Ermos from Low Voltage Nation, if you're familiar with him. I mean, I remember when I first really started following him and noticing him, he was sharing a lot of technicians, were posting videos of, their quality work, in the telecom rooms and the TRs and ERs and dressing into the cabinets and racks. And I mean, I think that gets some attention too. I think positivity is good, but I think you're right. I mean, how many friends have I made in the last year, making funny jokes, on these, some of these failed posts. And I think I think your intentions, maybe are a part of this, I think is what you're saying. I mean, is that all you're going to do is jump in and make fun of people and have a laugh, or, are you doing anything else with it? I'll tell you the one that got me, and I don't remember if it was you or Vinny or who had shared it, but somebody shared a TikTok of someone showing an entrance facility. And it was more telecom wiring than it was security. And, the guy was kind of a joke about how you feel when you walk in and you see that. And that one kind of hit me because I've had contracts over the years where I would have to go out and I'd have to do like activate one circuit, or activate, one port. And it is a very low pay, on the contract, and you're walking into an entrance facility, which is, depending on the building config, may not actually be your ERTR. That may not be your main, equipment room where everything is, but it's where everything comes into the building. And, it's all these different services, and there's not a lot of pride in that work. Maybe there ought to be, but, the contracts don't pay that way. And so I remember seeing that and thinking, man, I feel really bad to be picked out on something like that, because you just don't have time. I mean, what are you supposed to dress your 4-pair cable and make it immaculate compared to all the others and get fired because you were supposed to do like 8 of those that day and nothing else looks real good? I mean, this kind of layers up over time. So, I mean, that was one where I thought, hey, are we being fair to people, when we do this?
Yeah. And I think that, I think you bring up a good point when you say that it's like layered over time. It's not just layered linear in time, but it's also layered like with circumstance of the situation. And so when it comes to the responsibility of why it looks like that, like I was commenting on one a couple weeks ago, because I go through ebbs and flows, right? Sometimes I see them, I know the people who are posting them. I'm like, okay, this isn't like to hurt anybody, and it's sometimes things that are outside of a technician. Like you can tell, like if you got a camera hanging from the wire, I'll assume to drop it down, 13 inches. It's like a tech didn't do that. Okay. So like a DIY gas station owner, maybe.
Yeah.
Not a technician, right? And so sometimes that stuff's funny, but I saw one not but a couple weeks ago where it was a fire panel layout and it was done with like, I don't know, like liquid tight conduit or something. So it looked like this octopus looking mess. And I had a couple of, brash comments on that one because it was at the expense of like, can you believe that this happened? And that puts a lot of the blame on the technician when as a technician, that's not always where the blame lies. Yes, I have not been trained and looked at my work and thought, how can I do that better? That comes down to being a better person. But that tech was also not trained. The PM didn't, do it. Whatever got signed or closed off by the customer didn't do it, or the GC. And on top of all of that, like it's, higher level security professionals who are just trying to get the work done, and they want it to come in under budget, and they want it to come in on time, and they want it to come in as smooth as possible. And they throw gavels at that stuff sometimes, and it gets pinned on the guy who tightened the screw. And
so that was the exact post that caused me to write this question, because I remember that conversation. That is the one.
Okay.
And I will tell you where I think I tried to jump in and say, I think I kind of see where Bear's coming from here. Or at least I want to think that's what I said, which was probably 2 comments below where I also made fun of it. But but I think what I saw in that post where that was a little different was the way that they did that with that seal tight. That actually took a lot of time and effort. May not really been the right way or the best way, but I feel like somebody, to your point, wasn't properly trained, because they actually took a lot of time to try. They were trying to do it right. They didn't know how. It wasn't just slapped in there. The wires weren't coming in all diagonal. It was an odd looking situation for sure. But I mean, they put work into that is how I felt. And
yeah. And I have a drive, and I feel like you have this too. And a lot of the circles that you and I run in, you see this amongst good security professionals, that we want the industry to succeed. And it's not just like, oh, I want my industries to succeed so that I still have a paycheck or there's still work to be done. But we want it to succeed because security is something that I ethically and morally see sits above other free market industries, because we're actually doing things that allow those other industries to play safe or to play secure. And so if that's my main goal, and I'm really concerned about the education of the technician, then I don't want to like roll shit downhill. I want to look downhill and pick whatever that is up and say, hey, bring it up here, bring it to this standard. And you had said, like, is this contributing to better standards or not? And that's another issue that we have. In the security industry, standards are there's not a set standard. And there's a couple of organizations that try to make them, from SIA to ASIS to PSA and stuff like that, which is great, and that's what we need. But a lot of those organizations aren't touched by the security integrators that are down on the ground running.
Do you think we need more of like an affiliation with an organization like Bixie, for example? Because they're very plugged into the trade schools, the electrical trades. They have their own, Bixie ATF training center in Tampa. I think there used to be a lot of other union halls and other organizations where they would have authorized, and they would actually get into how you dress the cable, dealing with the conduit, what's a right and a correct install actually look like. Where I think with like PSP and things like that over in our industry here in security, obviously it's more about the design, it's the layers of security, it's it's from that perspective. But I would agree with you. I'm not sure outside of your training at Black Picket Fence on how you get into the wiring and the install, right out the door, for example. I don't think there's a lot of that where they can say, okay, let's send you to class and let's learn how to, install this correctly. And maybe it's out there and I just don't know. But I just wonder if maybe like a closer affiliation, because, Bixie's more telecom, of course, but they're also teaching them how to install the the UTP cable, the Cat 5e, the Cat 6 that we're using. I think there's a lot of similarity there. I mean, do you think something like that would be helpful?
Yeah, there's definitely overlap. And the company that I worked for prior was a datacom company, and I could see
Mm-hmm.
the technicians carry over that datacom knowledge into security,
Right.
and it was applicable right out the gate. And then you see it on the electrician side too, that they'll come over with relay logic and circuit understanding, and that's applicable. And security is like this, man. Security is like this really this big mosaic, or like this kind of like when diamonds have those fractures in them. There's just so many facets to it,
Mm-hmm.
because you kind of got to know a little bit of AV, you got to know a little bit of fire, you
Yeah.
got to know a little bit of electrician, a little bit
Yeah.
of datacom and telecom. And so it would be beneficial, I think, if some of the bigger organizations that already have some of that structure in place, like SIA or as is, started to really build things that went from top to bottom. Because you're right, it plays at the top. It plays in the design, it plays in the risk management, the project management understanding, but oftentimes it doesn't get down into the technician and the
Mm-hmm.
integrator that's on site.
Right.
And that's difficult to do, because some of it you have to learn on site. You have to learn in a field type of environment. But even the understanding, like you said, with blackpicketfenceonline.com, like that course that I have for access control circuit understanding, that like that's not taught very often from the organizations in our
Agreed.
industry. And I think, I don't know how people feel about this, but I've felt for a long time that the technician is not very highly regarded in our industry. And oftentimes we like to think of, the corporate guys that are walking around in, blue
Mm-hmm.
slacks and dress shoes at the conferences, and, the guys with the blue blazer panel and all of that stuff. And they do good. They do good to push the industry at the cutting edge, but it's like the technician just isn't regarded. It's just the guy in the Richardson hat with the, work boots on, and he's just going to be the guy that gets it done. We are
Yeah.
the guys who talk about the important thing. And when you forget that piece of our industry, you're going to get subpar work. Like if we're not taking care of them also, then when it might be good design, it might be good in theory or good in manufacturing, but when it gets to the field, it ends up looking like something that you can now post about. And why does it get all those comments? It gets all those comments because people are like, oh my gosh, look at this. I've got something to say about that. And everybody's got something to say about that, but nobody's actually helping the guy who's doing it.
Yeah.
So my heart's a little passionate about at least closing the education gap, so that
Right.
less and less of those photos
Yeah.
get people a following.
No, I think that's fair. So you just talked about that fractured diamond, just how the different aspects in the security industry that we encompass. And it's kind of the point of this podcast, right? 49 volts. It's all about low voltage. I have a background in all these aspects. So it's kind of interesting. You pointed out, I mean, I have an AV background, electronics, telecom, and then you fall into this and it's like all of that plays into it and matters. But to even expand on that, I had Chuck Harold on last week, and he comes from a law enforcement background and into security, but he has strong feelings about cybersecurity. And his feeling was that security is security, and there's too much separation between cybersecurity and physical security, that the two are very intrinsically linked. So I mean, how do you feel about that? I mean, do you feel like we should see it as one thing and not keep it so separated? Or do you see it how a lot of people, I'll admit, I always think more from an IT perspective when I hear cybersecurity, and that is something, that is more of a specialty, in that arena? Or do you think like Chuck, like, hey, this is something that all of us that touch the network need to identify with?
Yeah. So I think that the word that's been trending around that topic is convergence. And I was talking to Lindsay Martin on Badge Pass's Badge Banter. They had me on there. And I was telling her that I'm coining and trademarking the great smushing, is what I'm calling it. Where
The great smushing.
Physical and cybersecurity are just going to blend into one another. And so
Okay.
I agree with that. Now, the hard part is that you're dealing with, at that point, so much territory.
Mhm.
You've got physical security and cybersecurity, and while yes, it is all security, I think it would be irresponsible to think that like a technician in that genre should be able to, do the whole gamut of physical and cybersecurity. You're going to need experts in both. I
Yeah.
think that there is that middle of the aisle. There's that middle, that gray line in between the two of them, that we do as physical security professionals need to know more about cybersecurity. It needs to be something that we're concerned with when we're, bringing up video servers online or access control servers, or if we're playing on the network and we're trying to get things to talk to each other across the street. Like all of that stuff, we have to be cognizant, and we have to have some sort of basic understanding of network topology, how it works, the principles that go into it, the protocols that you have to use to connect to these devices and get into these things. So that needs to be something that we're incorporating into our technicians for certain. But there are also guys that need to be nerds and know how to, just walk their way easily through Meraki, firewalls or something like that, so that things can be set correctly. And I'm not going to expect that of the guy that I'm also having pull cable and put a camera up,
I think that's fair. I mean, from my perspective, I think that cyber has emerged as probably the most challenging and elite, almost Navy SEAL force, within the IT industry. I mean, I was in IT in the 90s, and through like 2010. I mean, I remember that evolution of where you had an IT person that kind of knew everything. And by the time I left and came over to the manufacturing side, that was not a possibility. Even if you had an IT person running a network, you still needed a managed services provider to deal with it, because no one could know everything. It's just not even feasible. And I feel like with cyber, which I'm not a true expert, I have a loose understanding, based around like compliance and things like that. I mean, that is such a fast moving, ever evolving, ever changing, almost throughout the day, every day. You have different types of threats, new threats. And I think that would be way too much to expect anybody in any of these IoT industries, which is what we are in security. We tend to think of as like it's our stuff, and then IoT is all the other stuff. We're part of that. We're another item on the network. We're not a server. We're not a domain controller. We're not we're in that IoT space. And that is too much knowledge, I think, for the average CIO or the average, VP of information technology. I think it's really heavy. But I do feel, from interacting with a lot of internal people that provide like tech support, for example, out to the field, for products I've worked for. I mean, I think there is a better concern out there about cyber hygiene, but I still think that it's not thought of enough. So I would probably agree with him from the standpoint that if we should at least have that, if we think of ourselves as like the Weeblos or the Cub Scouts, you got to get all your little patches. I don't think we're earning our cyber patch the way that we ought to. I think we should think about it more.
Definitely. 100%. I agree.
All right. So it's settled. We agree.
Settled. Yeah. Tell the world.
Yeah. So let's have a little fun here. We talked over on another podcast. I could tell there were some things under the surface. You were smiling. You didn't quite bring it up. No one can fire me right now. So let's hear the craziest service calls locksmith you ever had.
Oh, man. Okay, so I started in locksmithing, and I ran as just a locksmith for, I don't know, like 3 years before I started to get into electronic hardware. And then that kind of took me in different directions. But while I was working for that locksmith, so we did residential, which that's where it gets crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I got like 2 moments of like, holy crap, this is crazy. And one of them, well, I guess 3. I can think of another one too. No, so one of them, I'm going to just rekey a house, right? I show up. It's a, guy that was probably in his mid-20s. He was thin, tall, and I was working on rekeying his house. There was no one else there. It was just me and him. And I realized that there's no deadbolt on the garage, and I'm like, "Hey, do you want a deadbolt, on your garage? We can put that in for you." And he's like, "Yeah, I do." And I'm like, "Okay, well, the deadbolt that I would put on is back at the shop. So can I come back like tomorrow at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon and put it on?" And he's like, "Yeah, my wife will be here." And I'm like, "Okay, perfect." So I finish up rekeying. I go home. I come back 2 o'clock the next day. I knock on the door and like no one really answers. And so like I knock on it again. I'm like getting out my phone, trying to find his number to give him a call. And the door opens and it's like a 20-something Asian woman who is wearing just a sweatshirt.
Oh.
And it is just a sweatshirt. And I'm like, "Oh, hey, I was coming back to change the deadbolt." And she, I don't know if she spoke English, but she was just like, and she went upstairs. And I then was like awkwardly like, "Okay, well, I guess now I'll do that." So I went to the garage door and put on the deadbolt and hollered up on the way out. But it was a very unique moment for that to happen. So that was a crazy one. There was another time that we did evictions, right? And so yeah, and I did a couple of them, and then I told the guy that I worked for, I'm like, "I'm done. Like I'm not doing evictions again," because I went out to one eviction in the sheriff's department. There was 2 officers, and it was like a house kind of on an elevated piece of property, and so there was like a 4-foot, up the concrete stairs to the front door on a small slab. And so I'm standing on the slab and I'm trying to pick in for the sheriff's department. And as I'm picking in, this little red truck comes roaring up the road and like pulls into the lawn like it's the gentleman's house that I'm now breaking into, right?
Right.
And he gets out of the car and he's probably like 6'3", 350, and like a man. Like at this point I'm in my 20s, but he's probably 50 or 60. And so like his overalls on, he comes barreling up to the door and he decides he's going to pick a fight with me because I'm not a cop and I'm also the guy breaking into his house. And the cops just like step back. And
whoa.
yeah, they're kind of like, "Hey," how they grab like their tack vest. They're like, "Yeah, we're just here to, this is an eviction." And he's like in my face. He's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Dude, listen, and I like step off the porch and it was kind of like, well, shit, man, I'm not doing that again. I almost got my ass handed to me and the cops were just standing there. Like, what about when we're doing evictions for landlords and it's just me and the landlord? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that was a pretty crazy one too.
Dude, that's almost like having to be the repo guy, but usually they grab and go. Like they get to just run and get out of there. Yeah. That's not a fun experience.
No. And then
go ahead. You got another one. I want to hear it.
So we got a rekey and I was like, okay. So I drive out to this town that's it was kind of like on the outskirts of Kansas City, so it was a little bit like a farm town. And I pull up to the the house, there's like 2 guys in full hazmat suits walk in. And I was like, "Huh?" And so like I stop and I'm like looking at my phone and I get a knock on my window and it's the guy, and I roll down the window. He's like, "Hey, how's it going?" And I was like, "I'm here for a rekey, but it looks like they're maybe like doing something in there." And he's like, "Yeah, so this was my brother-in-law's house and we didn't know it, but he was an extreme hoarder and the house is just full of junk. And it's so full of junk that he couldn't use the toilet anymore because it broke.
Oh my gosh.
Junk around it. So he was shitting in the bathtub. And so
wow.
we have the house the hazmat suits like cleaning that. Can you just rekey the front door and or whatnot? And so I was like, all right, I'm young. I'm like, just nowadays I'd be like, "Nah, dog, I'm not doing
Yeah,
it."
right.
But as a 21-year-old, you're like, okay, fine, I'll do it. And yeah, it smelled horrible. And I like,
oh, it's terrible.
Like I held out and I was like getting the deadbolt off and like walked away to rekey it.
Oh man.
So
I thought you were going to go like this was Walter White's house or something. Like this was a meth lab, and that's why they had the hazmat suits on.
No, I haven't rekeyed meth lab yet. So, but
I have a lot of crazy, not locksmith stories, but the one that always comes to mind that was funny for me was we were actually installing new Cat 5e cabling, which was just like, the new world in around 1997 when I think this happened. Pre-Y2K, getting ready for that. And it was in Dayton, Ohio. We were actually having to work at night and wire up for Donet. I don't even know if they're still around, but that was like a new internet service provider that was being built up in Dayton. And they were like over top of, I don't know if it was like an American Legion or just one of those kind of clubs that was only kind of open at certain times. And you had all the pool tables and all that stuff. And it was like an old building. So we were having to like run conduit and supports and like under, and then we had to do this at night. So this is like Friday night, we're finishing up and we're stacking all the reels of cable and getting everything to put it out into the alley. And I open the door and I walk out towards the van, and there's this guy who has no clothes on, and he has like a giant, I don't know my snakes real well, but like a boa constrictor type thing that I felt like was taller than me and him together, like a giant snake, no clothes, very cheerful fella. Yeah. And I just heard the door like slam behind me, and the door locks, and it's just me in the alley with Captain Snake, and I can hear giggling inside the building. Like, this is so funny in there. And I had to carry on a conversation with this guy to the point that he would leave so that they would open the door.
Yeah.
And they made some kind of joke about Indiana Jones. And then, that was that. But
yeah,
wasn't really expecting that. And if if we have any listeners from Dayton, the Oregon district has always been interesting. It's not a new thing. All right. So here's a thinker. If you could have any guest on the Security Today podcast that you've not yet had, who would that guest be?
Good question. Oh, I don't know. I didn't read that one, so I didn't have that one.
Oh, I caught you off guard.
Yeah.
I mean, who you really want to talk to?
Yeah. Man, that's difficult. I feel like it would have to be security oriented, right? It couldn't just be some left field podcast about, mushrooms or something like that. I would like to have like a high level official, I don't know, anywhere from the president or the VP or like some high level official in foreign affairs and international security and stuff like that. That would be cool to have on, just to kind of like, from the podcast's little bit of unfiltered questioning, like just to kind of like prod a little bit and be like, okay, what's this? What's that? This. So that would probably be, I would like that a lot.
Somebody that really knows things.
Yeah. Or somebody like who's high level in CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design. That stuff is fascinating to me. So I would love to have someone on like that too. But that doesn't feel like far away. I feel like that's just one LinkedIn message away. That's how I get half the people to come on my freaking show. It's just, hey, you want to come on? I'm like, all right, yeah, cool.
That's how a lot of us meet. I can tell you somebody I've met that I would like, that if I could have one person on, and if we focused on security, I would go Jack Carr. It may be a stretch, but Navy SEAL, now a very accomplished author, but he understands security really well. And I just think he's an interesting guy. And I have a way overpriced tomahawk over my head that I got because the James Reese character in his books, the terminal list, if you've heard of this, that's Jack Carr.
Okay.
Yeah. So I got the exact Navy SEAL spec tomahawk that is like the logo of his brand. So I'm too much of a fan. Not everybody takes their kid out of school to make a trip to go to a book signing for like a Navy SEAL author, but I did.
Let me turn the question a bit. If you
Okay.
could be on any podcast, what would you be on? Like, and it doesn't have, like, it could just be about your life and experience and security, but like, if you could be on a podcast, who's
Not just limited to the security podcasts?
No, like any podcast ever.
Because if it's security, it's yours.
Oh, well,
and that's not even a question. But if it's any podcast, I mean, how does anybody not want to be on Rogan?
Yeah. Me too.
And I'm in Ohio, I'm in Columbus, and so that's where Jamie is from. You know, anybody that's a Rogan fan, you got Jamie. Yeah. It's like Rogan, Jamie, and there's like a video editor that they've never met that they use off the internet. That's the whole enterprise. So I feel like I'd really hit it off with Jamie because he's always talking Ohio State, you know.
Yeah.
And I think I'd have something in common there. But yeah, because I feel like Rogan will give you up to 4 hours, and there's just so much I want to talk about. And I don't know. I just like him. I think he gives both sides a fair shot, and I think that that's why both sides always take shots at him. You know, I'm very kind of independent down the middle in all respects, and you know, I appreciate him for that. And so I think that's probably, and I guess it doesn't hurt. That's probably like the biggest podcast, or it was. I don't know what the biggest is now. It's probably something silly, but
yeah,
still like there's some kind of She's the Man, or there's some kind of new podcast that's supposed to be really big.
Yeah,
but you know, I don't think they want me. I think I don't meet the criteria. All right, so last question. Hopefully you saw this one because it's kind of a thinker too.
Yeah, I did.
So you've been doing this about 12 years now.
Mm-hmm.
If you could go back in time, like the Terminator, but in a friendly way, you're not going to try and kill yourself. You know, you're not going to John Connor yourself. But you're going to go back in a little ball of lightning, and you say, Bear, this is you 12 years from now. So first of all, how awesome is this? Check it out. But also,
yeah,
here's one thing I got to tell you. Like, you need to know this as you embark on this 12-year journey. What are you going to go back and tell yourself?
Yeah. I think that, you know, I feel like my career has been pretty risk heavy. I've taken some jumps. I've taken some leaps. I mean, we moved halfway across the country for one position. I went out on my own for a couple years. Like, I've taken a lot of risk and done it. And so I feel like what advice I would usually give to young technicians isn't the advice that I would give myself, because I learned that advice through what I'm going to do anyway. So it's like, what can I tell myself that I wish I just would have known earlier than I know now to see how far it could have actually taken? And I think it would be along the lines of like pushing my network faster than I did. So, and I think it's really common amongst technicians, but probably the first 6 to 8 years of my career, network wasn't something that was on my mind. And you might get that more if you come into security from kind of more of an office vibe. You know, you might come in and be like, oh, the big guys up top are talking and I want to be part of that conversation. But as a technician, like, you just kind of, you know, you do what you do and you go home to your family and you've got hobbies and you've got buddies you work with, but there's not this big push to be like, hey, go to conferences on your own dime and network, you know, like push yourself uncomfortably to shake hands and to, you know, give out cards and start making a name for yourself, because I feel that has led to a lot more opportunity and a lot of probably still bubbling opportunity that's coming down the pipe at some point. But yeah, as a technician, man, network, like find chapters of as is, or find, you know, locksmith associations, or find low voltage communities that are getting together locally and doing stuff. And then find the national ones, the big ones like ISC and GSX and all of that, man. Like, go to it, shake hands, meet people, be kind, be humble, take advice. Know that you're like, if you're doing that as a young technician, you're at the bottom of the totem pole, but that's not a weakness. Everyone tries to outdo themselves like, oh, well, I know
Right.
that. And then you show up not knowing it, you look like a dumbass, like it's actually not a weakness to be at the bottom of the totem pole. It means you have the farthest to go. The guy at the top of the totem pole who still sits in rooms where he's the smartest guy has the least to grow. He has got the least to gain. And so that's why in my career, I've really tried to change my situation a lot so that I'm sitting in new rooms with new people and new things to glean from. And I would have pressed into like, hey man, you're doing everything right, but just also push your network a little harder. So it's probably what I would lean back on.
I like that. And I think you almost are saying more than you think you're saying, because part of what you're saying too is when you're young, this is just kind of a job. Like I'm just showing up. I got to get my work done. I got to get out of here and get back to life. But I feel like as we get older, it means more to us than that. It's more than just a job. It's a career. We see it as a big part of our life almost. And I don't think this is negative. Maybe I'm sure there's a lot of virtue signal posts that go out that say don't do these things. But I think for me, it's part of my own identity. Who I am is part of, what I do. So, I think that networking and paying more attention to who is out there and value that you can get with those relationships. And what you're really talking about is like, see it as more than just a job, and invest some of your own time and your own energy and your own money, if they're not sending you to a show, to get out there and really enrich yourself. Because it's more than just, if you need a job, it's more than just learning knowledge, but it's also like, I feel like working is, aside from sleeping, probably the thing we do the most in life.
Yeah.
By the time we're done. And, I think you get so much more out of it if you take the time to get to know people and make friends and build those relationships. And, it gives you kind of a second family. That's probably another one of those virtue signal things that I see going around right now is, that's not your family. I don't know. I don't think you have to have that to be successful. I don't think it's fair to tell people that they have to do that if they want to make a living, but I do think we get way more out of it if we take that approach. I think it's better for us.
Yeah. I think of Roger Kimmick on the Security Guys podcast.
Yeah.
They were talking about work-life balance, and he's like, I hate that they call it that, because that's a part of your life. It's more just life balance, like being able to balance the entire life, not like there's this thing that you are and this other thing that you are, and it's constant conflict. And I think that's one thing that people like you, people like me have been able to do, especially with getting creative and finding where we feel we fit in the industry. It's making that not a work-life balance, like not this conflict. Like my job and my career is not a conflict with my life. There might be times that my employer or a project or the business I own conflicts a little with my life, but my work and what I've chosen to make my trade, I've stitched in to my identity. So that's not at conflict. This is just life balance that I'm figuring out, because I could be selling paper. You know what I'm saying? And then I'd still have the conflict of like, I'm looking to get home by dinner for my kids' sake, so that's not necessarily who you are conflicting with this other thing of who you are. You got to see it as one whole,
I agree. And I think life is no different than like a project. You're going to have to prioritize, and those priorities can shift and change. And if there's something big going on in your life, good or bad, that needs attention, that may pull away a little bit from the career part of it while you deal with that. And there's going to be times where the opposite is happening in your career, and there's something going on that really needs extra attention. And I think that balance is not like a set fixed amount, but I think, do you roll with it? And do you put that priority where it needs to be at the right time, or do you always shift it one way?
Yeah. It's Bruce Lee that says, be like water, right?
Nice.
You got to move back and forth. So
I like that. Be like water. Yeah, he lost me at the first jump kick. I can't do any of that stuff. And so I just don't even want to hear what the man has to say. That's like me trying to put my pants on in the morning. Stuff gets broken, and I played fullback, man. We just keep the feet on the ground, and
That's right. I played fullback, so I get it.
A great position that needs to make a comeback. I mean, come on. Yeah. Well, Bear, this was a lot of fun, man. I always love when I get to talk to you on air or off. So really appreciate that you made some time to be on here. I know you're a super busy guy. Someday you're welcome to make my podcast dreams come true. I'll come on your show if I'm ever eligible. But
for sure.
We definitely preach to an audience here that is not just the security industry. So for anybody out there that doesn't already know you, check the video description. Of course, I'll put it there too, but tell everybody how to find you.
Yeah. So I run Security Today podcast. You can find us on almost all platforms at Security Today podcast, or you can find me at Uncle Bear, BAER _ on Instagram and Twitter. And I'm also on LinkedIn, Bear Halvorson, spelled BAER. It's Norwegian. I didn't have a misspelling mishap early in my life, and now that's my name. So
I like it.
Yeah. And then blackpicketfenceonline.com is where I actually am working on a couple more courses, just kind of basics to give an overall understanding of different aspects of our security industry. And so it's just, I feel like there's three main modes of education in industries. You have manufacturer education, organizational education, and independent education. And so I'm trying to fill that independent gap, give you kind of a breakdown of what it's like from a technician's perspective, and hopefully that helps some people. So
I love it. And so again, thanks for coming on. I see now that Brandon Adams himself is on LinkedIn posting that somebody must have done an install with a hammer and chisel. So I'm going to go make fun of this.
Okay. And I'll
make funny jokes. And then you tell me I shouldn't do that. And that's how we'll kick off the weekend. So everybody else, we got more amazing guests lined up. But that is it for this episode of 49 Volts. Thanks.
Thanks.